So unfavorable is you spend more than you were allowed. Favorable, you spend less than you expected. Both could be good or bad. Definitely the unfavorable is bad, but a favorable could even be still a problem, as we talked about. It can be shown in a few ways. This goes back to accounting. It can be shown as a UF beside it. Ours are typically shown in brackets or parentheses, or it can be red or black, negative or positive. Typically ours are shown in parentheses, and that's standard accounting speak. Okay? So, here's a sample budget report. What do we see that's problematic in here? Because what I want you to understand, if you read it in your book at all, is there's more to it than just looking at the fact that we're $36,000 over budget here. We have to figure out at a deeper level what truly contributed to this. Okay? Because you can have an unfavorable variance and it be okay to an extent. Which one would that be, Ray? So there's three basic, if you read chapter 7, if you look at chapter 7, there's three basic variance types. Okay? There's efficiency, and this is on down in the slide deck that you guys have. There are volume, and then there are cost variances. So which one do you think is probably the best explainable unfavorable variance? A cost variance, or a volume variance, or an efficiency variance? Volume. Because if your volume goes up, incrementally you would expect some changes associated with that, right? And that's exactly what it says. The efficiency and the cost ones are the biggest problem, particularly, and what's the case here? What do you see kind of anecdotally in these numbers? Did our patient days go down?
Way down.
Did our care hours go up relative to that? So even though we saw fewer patients, we shot our care hours up, right? And then the average hourly rate went up. So intuitively, what would be some reasons for, in particular, that?
Maybe using the outside travelers.
Travelers may have been up. Overtime may have been up. What else could be in that mix? What are the other premium pay issues that can drive an hourly rate? Callback and on-call. You guys an excessive amount of callback and or on-call. Bonus, BRN, can be in there. Because remember, when you do this, when you build a budget, the base budget, you're factoring in all of your normal differentials. So your night diffs would be factored in, your weekend diffs would be factored in, but no extra from a callback standpoint or anything, BRN would be factored into that. So that may be, that's where we would get that 35 from a budget standpoint, once we built that base budget, but then we allow that to kind of shift a little bit for whatever reason. And this one's particularly concerning because the fact you went down significantly, you're down by 115 in volume, and you're up by 200 hours of care, right? So let's dig a little deeper. Keep that chart in mind, keep that chart right there. So we need to be able to calculate the actual three variances, okay? And then add those up, because when you go through this process, and I'm going to cheat and use my book, just to make sure I get you the formulas correct. You really want to know how the sum of the parts affected the whole to know what to attack correctly, okay? So let's talk about an efficiency variance first. And you guys have this sheet here, so I'm going to switch off of this for a second, and I actually have this built so I can follow the numbers.
And that's what screwed me up. So I know what I'll do moving forward. I know exactly what I'll do moving forward. Well, I went back in
In
April.
theory now, API should automatically
I went back in API, and I had a bunch of nurses oriented in November, and I thought they were finished November, but I guess my time was off.
Yep.
So some days I have 3 orientees in addition to 4 nurses for like 12 patients, whatever. And they never got coded in chronos as orientation, so that's why my productivity was 68%. But I know what I'm doing moving forward, because I'm going back to some nurses I got now, that I'm going,
Man, look out.
I'm learning something. Hey. You cracking me with a whip. Because I was technically on budget, just not on paper.
That sounds good, I like that. That
What
sounds
was
good.
that?
You can Go with
Not on
that,
paper.
go with that.
Technically, I was on budget, just not on paper.
That's right.
All right, so for our efficiency variance, and these calculations are in your book. So if you follow chapter 7 in your book, you're gonna see these exact calculations. What are we determining with respect to efficiency variance? How efficiently we measured our hours per patient day, or how efficiently we use our staff. And that's measured in the difference in hours per patient day fundamentally in terms of the work standard, okay? So on this example, in order to get that difference in efficiency, we first have to calculate what the hours per patient day is by dividing the nursing care hours by the number of patient days. That gets us that relative standard, okay? So they're budgeted for at 11.40, right? They actually ran 15.29 hours per patient day on that standard, or on the actual performance, okay? So that's where that 3.88 comes from. Okay, that's the first step, is to calculate the 2 hours per patient days, and then subtract the actual from the budget. And that's where you get the 3.88. Now here, we then take that difference times the actual number of patient days. And again, these formulas are in your book. I just kind of want to walk you through it so you can see how it's done. And then once we understand how many hours per patient day on that difference we're talking about, so we're talking about 1,500 incremental hours, right? Based on that standard difference, okay? So to figure out the dollar amount, you then take those 1,500 hours times your budgeted amount. And that tells you what the efficiency variance for this unit was. So they were, from an efficiency of use standpoint, because the efficiency is measured in the difference between what should have happened and what did happen, relative to work hour standard. Based on the budget, they used $52,920 too much. Now you're saying, Steve, but the overall variance is only $36,750, okay? But can you see where you need to break this down? Because you have a much larger problem from an efficiency of use standpoint than you think you do, if you just look at the whole of $36,750. What is this actually telling you? From this particular piece of it. Had I run the census appropriately, I could have made an additional $52,900 and had a much greater positive variance than I otherwise would have had. So if I control that efficiency and run daily the correct number of hours, keep this here, I would have made an additional $52,900 on the sheet. Make sense? Okay? All right, so then you need to know volume. Fix this. And we said volume went down, didn't it? Right? So we have to know the impact of that volume going down from a cost perspective. So to first determine that, you subtract the volumes. Okay? So we know we went down by that 115. We already see that up there. So what does that equate to in terms of expected worked hours? Because we're budgeted for 11.40, right? That's what we should have done. So that incremental difference times the 11.40 tells us the impact of that decline from an expected number of work hours, right? So when you translate that to the 45, you're taking the number of worked hours times the average hourly rate that was budgeted, okay? So what does this tell me? What does the cost variance tell me here? It says that because we declined 153,000 patients, I effectively lost the equivalent of $45,000 based on the comparable work standard. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, please ask. Because all we're going to do in the end, once we calculate these, is add these all up. Okay? And they're going to equal, as you can see, $36,750. Okay? What is the real problem here? As we said, what's the net effect here, truly? I could have made 52 had I managed labor correctly, but then I lost 45 relative to the change in census based on the expected. So can you see the synergistic effect of this? Had I managed both sides of this better, we would have had probably a fairly favorable gain in this favorable variance. So the last one you look at is cost. Cost is much simpler. What's the incremental difference between the budgeted and the actual $5? Okay? And then that one is times the actual number of care hours provided. So because I had a change in my labor mix, I spent $29,000 more than I should have, but only based specifically on cost. It's actually more than that overall, all right? So how do I get to the 36,750 or any of this? You add all three of these up, and you're going to come back to the same overall budget variance. But what you're after in this is to do a root cause analysis of where your biggest negative contributor was in this. Your big problems are not cost variances, but efficiency and volumetric differences. Or I mean, cost and efficiency. Your volume is not a big deal to that extent. But when you see, as in this case, a decline in volume and a rise in hours and a negative labor mix, that is very problematic and needs to be investigated and determined as to why. Now, does this fundamentally look familiar for Palmetto Health to an extent? Why?
So, Steve,
Yes, ma'am.
does this mean that this is what happens when we don't follow our grids?
Yeah, when you're, well, not the grid. I think what we need to do is, the grid is a starting point. This is what happens when we're not attuned to what's going on a daily basis on the unit, and we see that decline in census that we didn't otherwise account for, and we staffed into the grid. Because in this instance, let me ask you this. This effectively would be that grid, right? The 5750 hours, patient care hours, right? So that could effectively be those 5 nurses on the unit. What should have happened if we declined by 115 total patients? Should we have seen that 5 come off and maybe go down to 4 and follow the census away from the grid? Yes. So that's fundamentally what happens is that we see changes in our census, but and this is what I fundamentally see happen on a daily basis in some areas, we continue to staff into the grid instead of following the census. That's fundamentally this problem. And within that, on top of it, kind of the icing on the cake, is we had a labor mix change, and in our environment, what we historically seen is by necessity, we've introduced more travelers than what we originally thought we would need in that labor mix budget, or there's been inducement by callback or VRN or other things that weren't anticipated in the budget that drove that labor hours mix. per hour, on a per hour basis up a little bit. Does that make sense? This is very problematic. This is kind of where we kind of have been to an extent fundamentally, is we've seen flat census. This is an example of declining census, but 9th ortho could be that example of declining census. Maintaining the staffing grid instead of following the census, and a labor mix issue involved. The grid is a guidepost, and that's what I want, and I hear this a lot. This is a point I want to make around variance analysis in the budget. Your budget grid is a very valuable tool. It gets us started, but it is not the endpoint. What we do on an actual control basis on a daily and monthly and yearly basis is where we need to be in terms of our management process. And from a daily staffing standpoint, managing to that actual census relative to the expected ratio, it gets us, will keep us on target, per se. Okay? Because you're going to see that in the unit I'm going to show you. There's only, like I said, there's only 3 days I believe that unit was probably overstaffed by probably one shift in a 24-hour period. The other days, there's a different issue. Okay? So that's why I wanted to kind of show you this, because it doesn't give you the whole picture to simply say from a dollar standpoint in terms of contribution and impact, to simply say we were off here. You really need to understand where the biggest problem is. Where is the biggest problem? Here. Right here. This is our biggest negative variance right here. It's 52,000. So if I'm going to attack this overall issue, I'm going to go and discover why I wasn't as efficient as possible.
So how can we manage this more to a daily basis?
That's what I'm going to show you.
Oh,
Here. That's kind of the value-added take-home toy that I'm going to give you all. And it is very easy to do on a daily basis. And I'm going to show you kind of, because it's going to give you kind of that eventual break-even point. If you are over, at what point can't you make it over without it being dangerous? So we'll talk about that in just a minute. But does this process make sense? You can't look at the overall. You need to divide it into these 3 issues. The only thing that you truly don't have is this. Right there. How could you get that off your report to web? How could you get that? Do you know your overall labor spend? Do you know how many hours were you used? Just divide the labor spend by the total hours worked. And then you've got your average hourly rate. Now the problem is you need to compare that to a budgeted hourly rate, but how can you do that? Your budgeted hours and your budgeted labor spend get you that budgeted average hourly rate.
And
So
then
you-
labor spent by what?
By the actual hours used in a month. So if you look on your report to web, let me pull Sarah's for a second. So if I look on Sarah's report to web, she spent year-to-date in labor $2.2 million, round number, okay? And year-to-date, and that's budgeted, she's budgeted with roughly 2.161, or 2,161,000. And then you go down to hours, and she's budgeted under productive, where that's total paid, so let's go to total, let's see, where am I at? Total, right there. She's budgeted for total department man hour. Don't use productive, use total department man hours. She's budgeted for 71,959. So if you divide 2.161 divided by 71,959, that's her budgeted average hourly rate for her department. Then you do the same thing with actual for the period. And that will get you what your actual average hourly rate is versus what your budgeted average hourly rate is, so that you can then do this formula. Okay? Make sense? Everybody following? Questions? This is very important because you have to know, you've got this overall report here that says that, you know, from a cost standpoint, where are you at? I have a hard time reading these things. Good thing I'm not a handler. So from a labor standpoint, she's got an overall that says she was, or for this month, as an example, she's 19,000 to the good. What does that really mean from a labor standpoint? And from an overall standpoint, though, she is, total department expenses, 29,000 to the good. Does that really mean anything, per se? How would she go attacking, if this were a negative 29,000, would you know where to go attack first? Would you do it from a volume standpoint, would you do it from a cost standpoint, or would you do it from an efficiency standpoint? This will tell you where to go look, where your biggest contributor is in those three key areas, okay? And that's why you calculate what that. And you have these readily available in your report, so you know each month what your census is, you know how many hours you used, right? And I say nursing care hours, that's total work hours. You can back into your average hourly pay rate, you know what your total payroll costs are, but we're only talking about labor here. And then you know what your base work standard is. So you can calculate this each month. So here's your homework. You get to take your report to web. And I want you each to calculate these three back into this for May. And calculate these for me and bring them back and tell me about them on your budgets. Tell me which one you think contributes the most to whether either positive or negative problem you have. Because you can't actually have a positive again. You can have a positive variance, for instance, in this instance of Sarah here, but you could have a negative contributor in one of these key areas that kept that positive variance from being even larger. So if you were to simply look at that positive variance, you say, well, I'm good, I don't need to do anything else. But part of our job in managing this from a variance and budget control standpoint is how we maximize the use of the budget and maximize our contribution margin to then contribute strategically up to the whole. Yes, sir.
I was gonna say on our report, we have our actual is 0. I don't know if it flowed over, but let me see if
Yeah, you may need to, let me see.
our R&E has that. That's what I was looking at my R&E.
Yeah, wherever you guys get that, because we get individual campus census reports, and they give me the daily and monthly censuses. So I don't have too many of those reports to come to me, so I'm not certain where you guys get that. So you can ask your finance people and they'll be able to tell you what that is. If you have a 0 on there, you can get it. So everybody got their homework for next time?
Are you gonna set
562.
aside worksheets that we can plug it in similar to what you did?
562.
Well, maybe, but I want you to build it first. Yeah. Yeah, I want you to rebuild these. I want you to get these numbers off of your budget reports, okay? This would be total worked hours.
Total census.
You can back into your average hourly rate like I showed you.
Got a budget of 680.
And if you have a question on this, call me and I'll help you individually.
See,
But your patient days is simply your census. And then if you read chapter 7 walks you through step by step what I just did. And then once you've done it, then I'll send you this, it makes it easy. You got a hand calculator first. Yes, ma'am. Yes, you got a question? Yep, take a picture.
Yeah.